Hi guys, it's David Rhodes. I'm at the SMI, the Swiss Mining Institute conference at the moment. Just finished that conference and great to talk to Matthew. Hi Matthew.
Hello, and thanks for joining us. I know it's tiring. These conferences can be absolutely exhausting, so appreciate that. SMI, how was that one? We've been going
Great.
to loads this year.
Well, a few, enough to see all our investor base. So we've been at this institute conference for 3 years now. So it started when we were just a fledgling company and getting our investor base here in Europe. And I'm glad to say 3 years later, we've delivered on our revenue. Our investors are very happy. Lots of new investors here. It's really grown in the last 3 years. So it's a great conference for us to be at.
Okay. I actually want to talk about Mexico, honestly, but just remind us what are the numbers? What's the revenue number look like now?
Yeah. So our target for this year was $6 million US dollars. Our Q4 was 5.4 million, so we'll blow through that, which is great on our revenue. So we're pretty.
Why is that? Where's that come from? Is that just the increase in gold price?
A little bit of gold. Obviously, we're about 65 gold, and the rest is silver. So we had a nice bump from both gold and silver. But the main thing is really Tahuehueto, our Mexican asset, which is quite poignant for this call, has got really ramped up now. So that's really got back into. It's early in the year, it was giving us some issues. It wasn't really performing. Now they're ramping up well. So we're getting that great boost from that income coming in. And that will continue next year as well. So we're looking to get up to at least over 10 million of revenue, maybe 12 if we're lucky next year with that mine. And also our Gold Conda mine ramping up as well. So it's looking good. It's looking good.
Okay, nice step up indeed. Okay, well let's we'll come back to the assets in a minute because I want to get an update on everything, especially understand what's happening in Africa. Right, Mexico. Let's talk Mexico. We've been asking CEOs around the world, I know you're chairman, around the world to give us their views on the ability to do business with the new government. We've got Claudia Sheinbaum has come in, AMLO's gone. She's putting her own stamp on things, it seems, but has much changed on the ground?
Well, two things. Obviously, Empress has got an investment in the Tahuehueto project. I'm also the chairman of Luca Mining, and we've got two assets in Mexico. So I kind of got two hats in that sense, if I can call it that, in respect to Mexico. Like most governments or presidents, when they come in, they've got to get elected. So they have a certain style to get elected. And then when they're actually in their job, as we see around the world, and I've been doing mining in lots of different countries for over 30 years, they have to get their feet under the desk, see what's happening and how they can do best for the country. And obviously, her party and her thesis is very much welfare, which is fantastic. There's a lot of poverty in Mexico, so that's great for her thesis. But one thing I was very pleased not to hear, in her 100 pledges of what she's going to do, open pit mining was not mentioned, which is a big difference between the previous president, who was very much ban open pit mining. So that was not in our 100 pledges. And I think the whole of the mining industry in Mexico had a lovely exhale of air when it wasn't mentioned in that sense. So whether that may come on the agenda in the future, can't say, but it's certainly not being tackled by the legislative powers at the moment. So big change in that on the macro.
Big change in the sense that, okay, it wasn't mentioned negatively, but not being mentioned at all, does that leave some level of uncertainty about how they treat that going forward?
I don't think so at the moment. I mean, she's got 100 pledges. That is what she's going to work on doing in her presidency. Open pit mining, the banning of that was not on those pledges. So that's not going to be, as my understanding is, that's not going to be anything that she's looking to do because it's not in her pledges.
No, I understand that from the negative perspective. AMLO was very much against it. I'm just saying the fact that it wasn't mentioned, it's not, none of the words weren't mentioned means that, is there an uncertainty around, well, how will you deal with it? Because, we will need to put in applications for license permits for open pit. How do you deal with that? How will they deal with that? What's the expectation of the companies that you're involved with?
Yeah, and obviously get many questions about it. Although the mines in question are underground, so that is one of the saving graces in respect to these assets. And one of the reasons, we're very, driven to obviously explain that factor. They're underground, they're already producing, they've already got the permits, they're already, obviously, as being in production. Managing the situation with respect to permits and changes that may be required. The key thing about the open pit aspect is, the worst case would have been a complete ban, legislative ban, and we saw that happening in some other parts. Argentina, for example, certain parts of the provinces there banned it. Happened quite a while ago now. That's not happened. So it's very much the law is in place. You go through the usual permitting process, and you've got a strong case now if you're an open pit mine or looking to do an open pit mine to push through those permits. That's my view at the moment. Yes, there's a lot of noise about it. Yes, there's uncertainty. But it's way, in my personal view, way clearer now that it's not going to get banned in the short term, which could have been the case before.
Yeah, okay. And I guess, as I say, with underground mines, perhaps it wouldn't have, it won't affect you, but the knock-on effects in terms of something like that, being instigated or a long drawn-out process is that foreign direct investment, looks a little bit poorly on, Mexico as a jurisdiction. Okay,
and
right.
You're right, it does. No, totally. And we've seen a lot of the mining companies reduce their exposure to Mexico because of it. And there is always a sentiment recently because of what's happening about Mexico. But from our point of view, that's an opportunity. It does mean if you're an existing producer, you've got the revenue. I mean, Luca, for example, is looking to do $100 million of revenue this year, which is fantastic. It's got 60,000 gold equivalent ounces it hopes to produce. It's got some good quality workers. Mexico is a mining country. It's one of the largest silver producers, obviously copper, gold, etc. So we are very, very comfortable being in Mexico because we've got the locals, we've got the ambiance with the local communities. We're working hard there. We're producing money. We're paying our workers good wages. They've got employment, and we've got the community with us. I think the main thing is the community side, as it is in most mining. You've got to keep the community working with you rather than having any battles against them, which obviously is not something any mining company should do. So being there, having established operations underground, obviously certainly helps with the open pit aspect, and producing the results, which Luca will do. And obviously the attraction for Empress is that our silver stream is on Tahuehueto, which is one of the Luca assets.
Okay, well, hey, let's. I promise I'll come to the assets. I promise. I know you're desperate to offload.
You can see I've been
right?
You can see I've been out of conference.
Yeah. I'm sales mode. But just sticking with that, you talk about therein lies the opportunity, because I think there's a lot of kind of cash-starved companies in Mexico. They've not felt the love for the last, during Alloy's tenancy, tenure, I should say. He's caused problems for them, and some of them have been able to kind of work their way out of it by looking into other jurisdictions outside of Mexico. A lot heading into North America. Others have just down tools and preserving cash and hoping that things will be better now under Claudia. And others, I think, perhaps are going to struggle to get out of this. So, are you looking at Mexico as a jurisdiction of opportunity? Or are you saying more broadly, it's an opportunity for others?
To be blunt, and probably fairly selfish, because obviously I'm the chairman of a Mexican mining company. We're looking at huge opportunities for us as a company.
Okay.
And we've got all the Mexican connections. We've got all the Mexican team there. Our operations, as I mentioned, are now ramping up, producing good revenue, and hopefully that will flow through to what people see in the marketplace as we announce our results and et cetera, over the next coming months. And that provides a great opportunity for, as you say, picking up those companies or those assets that are not loved or the market doesn't love. So it's a great consolidation play when you've got all that network and all that experience in a country to then make use of what is an international perception of what's happening in that country.
Yeah, I think there's a window before others realize maybe it's not going to be so bad. I mean, I think globally at the moment we're seeing a lot of jurisdictional risk. I mean, places like Canada, even falling foul of certain groups which kind of change perception, and permitting licensing has been slowed down. North America, certain states, globally, it's a real issue. What's your take on the way that mining's being affected by these sort of misconceptions or perceptions?
To be honest, in some cases, not obviously misperceptions. I mean, if you look at West Africa now, obviously there's a recent news article, and I don't know too much detail about also what's happened in Mali where the mining executive.
Resolute, yeah, they're out.
They've settled with $160 million. And I believe their chief executive has now got a passport returned to him. So that's obviously very unsettling for anybody working in that environment. So, I don't know the background. I don't know why. Obviously, it's quite a strong reaction of any governments to do that to a chief executive of a public listed company. So there may be more about it than I know. But it is obviously very concerning. I mean,
it's not a good look from
if I was a chief executive, I don't know whether I'd be going there, but you've got to. So you've got operations there, you've got to be there, you've got to see the people and support them and make sure they run properly. So very tough. And that's just a recent example. And as you say, there's been quite a few military coups in that part of the world. Niger, for example, and then Guinea and such like. So it's not a great view from the world looking at mining and the risks of where we work. The issue is these countries have great, valuable raw materials, mines, that are making a lot of money. We need the export of that product. So we've got to go there. We've got to work with the governments or the institutions, whoever they may be, that now, are there. And in some cases, we've actually seen an improvement. As you know, I do a lot of business in Africa as well. And, one of the countries, I won't name it just to be, it's actually working more efficiently now with the military junta running it.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I've done a lot of work in Africa too. It's not a competition, but I think you might win. If it was, you'd win. Where you sort of see these, I always call them like transition of governments. It's like we democratically elected, or at least the illusion of democratically elected. Africa occasionally has coups. Like we aware of over 90 since the beginning of the 1970s. And sometimes they're just they're quite peaceful, and others perhaps a little bit scary looking in from the outside. Nevertheless, it doesn't. Ex-banker, it didn't fill us full of confidence in terms of funding projects until we knew what was going on in country. When you're looking at, I know we should be talking about Mexico, but when you look at Africa, for instance, you're kind of seeing that kind of Western Sahel, Western Africa region, lots of talk during COVID of, sort of, let's say, I'm going to use the word terrorist activity in some countries. Now you're looking at countries like Russia, China, as always with Africa, kind of moving in and kind of replacing the French. It feels like it's a kind of reset moment, certainly in the Francophone countries. Does that put you off those countries as a result?
I think it does. And it'd be naive to say it doesn't. Of course it does. And whenever there's change, the investors hate uncertainty and change. It's a standard thing for any investor in any industry, in any business. And obviously stock markets, you see how the stock markets react to change. They always negatively. Most cases, change is negative on investors and stock markets and just general views on things. But as you say, we've worked in Africa. It works its way out. Something about Africa, it always works. It may take a couple of years or something, but it always somehow sorts itself out in one way or the other. Obviously, there's always circumstances where it's not positive, but in most cases, it works its way out into a way which is back to business. You can get back to business in that country. I know some of the Latin American ones, they seem to have a different mentality. When they get into political fights or political issues, they have trouble working their way out. It seems to take much longer, and that may be part of the mentality of certain countries, certain way they do business. But in Africa, it seems to always work its way out eventually. It's like transitional is a good way to put it. So
transitional for sure, but there's a time is money. There's the implication here that even if it does work itself out, there may be a new set of not necessarily mining code, but expectations around the finances, and that time itself will of course come. So if you're investing into the country, do you have to now factor that into it as a possibility in terms of your risk assessment?
I think we always have done, to be honest. Africa is always required, if you're working on doing an NPV calculation of your asset, you put a higher discount factor in for those uncertainties, what may happen. But I also think people miss the fact that if you're trying to permit in Canada, it's a 10-year plus. That's a lot of capital. That's a lot of working capital. That's a lot of burn rates. Someone was saying at the conference today, his environmental report is 15,000 pages. His environmental report he's had to do. And he did joke, that's a lot of trees. But that's a side issue on the environmental side of the whole factor. So that's something people have got to assess when they look at tier one countries. The cost of that. It's the same, you could say, as having a year or two delay because some military transitional aspect in an African country. That's obviously less time. So they're all factored in. When we look at mining, it's a whole raft of risks are usually factored in when we look at investing, how people invest there. But one thing we're seeing a lot of in Africa now is a lot of government institutions are looking to back financing in that country. So that gives everybody a lot more support when there are the government institutions supporting either the lenders, the investors, or actually directly lending as well into that country. So that's helping. But I noticed the China and Russia angle. I mean, Russia publicly came out and said, I'm supporting this country now, basically telling the French very loudly that now in the colonial power in that kind of country.
Well, that could be the end of the French, or not the French, the African franc in Africa. It's an interesting moment, and Africa seems to be itself as a continent transitioning into the more modern day. That you've kind of got all of these expats kind of moving kind of back in the country. Expats the wrong word, which I mean, people young who have left, got educated abroad, coming back into Africa and going, well, actually, there's a better way here. Maybe we should keep more of the wealth. Maybe we should run this the way it's run elsewhere in the world. And I for one, kind of have to say I applaud that.
No, I think
totally that's the right thing to do.
I totally agree. And that's really when I mentioned earlier about working with the communities and also governments as part of the community. You've got to give a fair take. When you're developing an asset, obviously there's employment, but you've got to give a fair take back to the government and the local community as well. And obviously working in Ecuador, which I did a couple of years ago with London Gold and doing their financing there, they're like a 50-50 split. 50% of everything you make goes to the government and the local community, and in that side, and the rest of the 50% take remains with the company. And that, people go, oh, that's quite a high tax bill. But in reality, it's not. When you look at taxes in most countries and what happens, it's probably about that anyway. But they make very much a statement that this is going to local communities, developing them and the governments, et cetera, et cetera. So giving a fair, proportion of the mining profits of a company to actually make a difference. And obviously education is one of the key things, et cetera, is so important, I think. And, as you say, that should be in any country, and that would certainly help. But coming back to Mexico, just the point of one of the key points of this, apart from me saying obviously the greatness of Empress royalty, the one thing we are very poor at, when I was at a Mexican at PDAC, I was at a panel in Mexico, I was saying, how many people does the mining industry in Mexico employ? I asked that to the head of the mining chamber. No idea. And I'm not being rude about the guy, I just didn't know the answer. We are very bad at publicizing as a mining community the value we provide, jobs, obviously the knock-on economic effects of employing people and what's happening. So I don't think we do ourselves much, justice in the sense of getting that message across of how important our business is, our industry, the jobs, but also the metals we provide as an industry. Cell phones, without is the EV. You can't have electric cars without mining. So all that is a positive. Wind, the solar, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we could do a better job, and that will certainly help when it comes to the government and the policies they're looking to put in place.
Yeah, no, it's a good point and understood. Well, let's. And I'd love to bounce around jurisdictional risk with you, because when you were, maybe let's do that as Empress royalty, right? You started off in sort of some, I guess, territories, Africa broadly, where perhaps others didn't know how to work there. They would maybe give cause for concern. I remember when I started this Crux investor thing, having to deal with people who talked about AK-47 countries without having been there, worked there, or done any business there. Broad sweeping statements like that. So not really helpful. Yet at the same time, you kind of got very successful companies like Perseus Mining, the Aussies, working in 4 different jurisdictions there, very successfully. But there's a way to go about it, right? So your thoughts on how you assess risk and then manage risk once you have made an investment?
Yeah, so very much, I think, the history has proven this. If you've got a mine and there's some technical problems, say metallurgy is not great, whatever, you can bring in the experts. I mean, for example, in Campo Morado for Luca, we brought Orsenko in, and they've been able to work through the metallurgy and get us a better recovery. So getting the experts in, and that takes time and money. So that can be fixed. Really annoying and basically getting revolting locals because of the way your practices are and the way you're dealing with them, that can shut the mine down. So quite an extreme discussion point, but really from our point of view, and this is all investors, but Empress definitely, when we look at investing in a producing operation or near-term producing, because that's our main target, we really do a lot of due diligence on the environmental side, the governance side, of course, and the social side. Because if their company are getting it wrong, then the mine will shut. That's how definitive we are when we look at an opportunity. And we have, over the last couple of years, passed on quite a few opportunities because the ESG, whether it's the S part or the G or the E, is not up to standard. So really important, and just history, and you see what's happening sadly, there's been a few land slips, if I can call it that, where things have slipped when they shouldn't have slipped in certain operations. And you can see the closure of those operations as a result. And you see some of the social aspects that happen on some operations, and they have issues with blockages of the roads and such like, and their operations have to shut. Panama could be an example of a major social and governance issue, which obviously hasn't gone the right way for that company. So really important. So number one, I'd say, Matthew, when we look at an opportunity, and then ongoing monitoring. We've got us an ESG experts on our board. We are very much close to our companies anyway as Empress. So we usually have weekly meetings via Zoom, obviously, with the management and the operations teams to hear what they're doing on the ground, so we can keep good knowledge of what's happening. And part of that call is going through the ESG aspects as well. So fairly hands-on in that respect. And mainly because, when our operations were then ramp-up phase that we've invested in, we're obviously very keen to see how they're performing and make sure there's no hiccups along the way. When they get into full production, obviously we can ramp back those weekly calls to, say, monthly calls, and a little bit less in that respect. But at this point, we've got the South African asset, and obviously the Mexican asset, Tahuehueto, is now reaching its full target. So we'll, by hopefully, I think next year the company is saying commercial production should be Q4 announced on Tahuehueto, and then obviously next year should be stabilizing. So less involvement from the Empress team on that. Our main focus really is on our South African asset, which is still developing underground, trying to feed more ore into the mill. And obviously that, like most things, there's always challenges in mining and getting up to the levels you expect it to get to.
Right, okay. Do you mind if we go through that, though? Because I think look, you were with royalty and streaming companies, right? You guys, it's all about the revenue. Are you able to kind of grow that revenue year on year after year after year, right? And I'm sure you'll tell me in a second how successful you've been on that one and what you thought, and you've given us some clues about your thoughts for next year. But to do that, either the assets that you've got have got to increase, but there's a point at which, in terms of life of mine restrictions, whatever's going on in the market with the metal prices, obviously it's good at the moment, that can help. You also got to buy stuff. You gotta get out and find and identify and add to the portfolio. So can you, if we can just bounce around Tahuehueto with Luca, just start with that and then move on to Galaxy and wherever you want to go with the four current assets.
So as I said, 5.4 million Q3 this year, which is great revenue. So huge, doubling from last year's 9 months results, which is great. Luca Tahuehueto is now ramping up. So commissioning, production, commissioning, will probably commercial production will get announced probably this next quarter coming. So this quarter, that shows that it's ramped up to the right level. That will then stabilize over the next quarter or so. So we hopefully have that fully producing, delivering all the silver to Empress on that side. So added that to Serentipite, our existing gold mine in Peru, which is producing, and Manica in Mozambique, which is fully producing. So we'll have 3 assets that are fully producing. The ramp-up asset is the Galaxy mine, in South Africa. They've got a mill which is only 50% capacity. Our investment in that company is really to drive the underground development, more faces, more tons up to the surface into the mill. And these guys are buying the trucks, they're getting the development faces, opened, and that's what they're working on. And we know nothing ever works as per the plan, so they've got hard work to do, and they are executing that now, so we can get that mill 100%, full, doubles their production, reduces all-in sustaining costs. Very much a win-win for them, and also a win-win for Empress, because we get the percentage of that gold as a stream from that company.
Right. How do I benefit as a shareholder?
So two things. So you see now we're producing revenue. We're cash positive. Our treasury is building up, which is great news. The next aspect of that is we've got the Luca asset ramping up, so we're going to get better revenues next year. And as I say, I think we should be well over, $10 million revenue next year, and hopefully more. Gold, silver to price obviously may help us, because I'm quite positive on silver. I'm fairly positive on gold as well, for keeping at these levels next year. Golconda, the South African asset, that is ramping up as well. So you'll see that coming through next year as well. So that's our existing 4 assets. With our cash that we're retaining now, we have a bank facility line of $20 million available to spend. And obviously we haven't been to the equity markets for a couple of years, so we've got that for dry powder as well, if needed. So I can reassure everybody that the team has got a good number of opportunities which are well advanced, which we're looking to execute to add another asset, further increase our revenue, which is, as you say, an important driver for any company, let alone streaming and royalty companies. So we hope to put a couple of assets on the books in the short term, which will give that extra boost and give that growth in the revenue line, not just because these operations are ramping up that I mentioned, but an additional boost as you put new assets on the books.
Right, and obviously it's a very competitive environment in terms of picking up new assets. Are you generating these yourself, or are they sort of being touted around the market? I mean, how likely are we to?
Yes, so it's a good question. So obviously the investment advisor to Empress is Endeavour Financial. Endeavour is one of the largest players in the financial community, arranging financings. Endeavour sees a lot of the transactions flowing through their network. So anything of a smaller size in the sense of what Endeavour does, so they're less than $25 million gold and silver streams, those opportunities are presented to Empress as part of our investment manager partnership. So that produces a lot of inflows. As you know, there's lots of investment bankers out there who have got ideas in respect to royalties and streams. We get all those inflow. And then Nora Pincus is also our VP, who's out there marketing us, looking for opportunities as well. So we've got really 3 main sources of opportunities. We are quite bespoke though. We are looking really for producing or very near-term producing assets to invest in. And as you know, we create royalties, so we invest in those companies to add value to that company. And obviously they then in return give us a stream of royalty to reward us for that. So we are looking to add value. We're not buying bits of paper, other streams. We are really looking to invest in companies, which is important, from our point of view. Obviously, it's harder work. You've got to negotiate the deal. You've got to pay for it. You've got to make sure your investment is wisely being spent, adding value, as I said. But that's really our whole thesis behind the company.
Right. So I'll leave the last word to you, which is, you tell me why you think what's in it for me, but if I'm not invested in your company today, why should I get invested in you? When's the step change going to happen?
Well, the step change has happened, to be honest. Initial step change has happened. $5.4 million of revenue coming in. You can see just by, if you want to check out the Luca website, see the performance of Tahuehueto. That is another major asset. So Tahuehueto and Serendipity, which is an existing producing asset of ours, that adds that boost you're going to see in our results, in our cash flow coming into the company. That will be happening over the next quarters. So you'll see that happening. The other key aspect to us is we're very undervalued compared to the marketplace. If you look at the industry, our streaming royalties, cash flow multiples the average is around 25 times multiples. If you discount that, because I'm a very conservative guy, say that's 10 times, and we're going to be doing at least $10 million of revenue or so this year, then I'll let the audience do the maths of 10 times that, what our market cap should be. And then if you look at where we are, we're only a $35 million market cap now. If you look at us making, 12 times million next year in cash flow from our existing assets without any new assets being added, you can see we're undervalued, and that's where the opportunity comes. It's a great opportunity to get into a company which is now performing, showing the market its strategy works, and more than happy to have people to call ask for further details. Obviously, we've been meeting the last couple of days with new investors as well, showing them that we have now proven our model. We've got growth in our pipeline, and then we've also got the value we can bring by reinvesting not only our own funding that's coming in from the operations, but also they've got a credit line as well, which helps. And the equity markets as well as a possibility.